scale, it'll still look a little pixelated. So sometimes it's better if you're going for a worldwide market to go for a 1.5 ratio that you're looking at. And a 2.0 calculates out to basically 192 DPI. They're basically pretty interchangeable, but it's good to have both so that way you cover all your bases. Pretty basic example again. And then also SVG is something else that is very useful, because SVG you can basically now embed like an image for the most part. It saves having to fool with all the retina graphics. It saves having to have the designer, oh, I got to export the 2x, the 1x, and the 3x, and now you have 3 folders of all these images, and it's just kind of messy, you know. You have to manage all these different pieces, and okay, well, it doesn't work on Android on the Retina screen or the new S5 screen or whatever. Oh, well, we got to fix the 2x and the 3x. Oh, those aren't in there. So with SVG, you don't have to deal with that. And I've included 2 examples, but you can actually include the entire code of the SVG itself. It's a very, very powerful thing because it's basically like putting a vector on your site. Now again, you can't use this for everything because not everything will work as a vector, but it's very powerful, and especially for like icons and things like that, you don't have to fool with it. They're very small in size for the most part. And something else really cool is you can actually change the coloration of the SVG with your code. And you can change the the code of the SVG itself if you embed it in it. So it's kind of powerful in that way. I don't have an example of that right here, but it's a pretty powerful tool. And it's basically like I have up here IE9 and above, which I know IE8's a bit of a killer, so you want to have the fallback for this like I've done here. So for the main people, we have SVG. Anything before IE, you would have a script that would detect it, and then you'd put in a JPEG version of it too, just so it has it. But for the most part, you wouldn't want to have that in there. I know that's not the best example for the fallback, but essentially say, okay, if it's not IE, you could add a class or something like that. Just basic example. And yeah, you can, like I said, you can directly embed this on your site. It's pretty much, you can go into Illustrator, your designers, to teach them this, to export to the SVG. They can do file save as, SVG, done. And it's saved out. And that's all you have to do for the vector file. And they can slice it. I know a lot of front-end people, and then the designers like to use slicey so that they can just specify all the icons and stuff like that. And this will work well with that too. I've kind of breezed through this real quickly, so I talk really fast, I'm sorry. But yeah, I have also all the sources. If you want to get more into the paint times and stuff like that, this is a beautiful article written really in depth on it. They use a combination of the Chrome Profiler along with, I forget what it's called, but it's something really, really interesting, and it kind of like watches the paint times, and you can see like a giant beautiful graph and watch every little piece of it, and then you can break it down and analyze what each style specifically does, and then you can live edit and change it. It's documented into the site. SASS, the SASS way, is a beautiful site to learn SASS itself if you're kind of new to it or anything like that. They divide all of their coursework up into beginner, intermediate, and expert, so you can kind of digest what you want. Because I didn't really go into like the most advanced examples because I didn't know how up to date everyone is with SASS, so I didn't want to make it so complex people would be like, thanks. The biggest part from SASS is to take away the variables. That's really like my favorite part of it. It makes everything really easy, especially when you're working with multiple clients on the same core, which is something we face a lot. And then if you want a good example of breakdowns and how to handle breakdowns in a unique way, the Boston Globe site is good. Let's actually take a look at this. They have in here, now if you watch this weather report, for example, this is one of my favorite breakdowns. As you get smaller, well, they've kind of made it ugly now. Well, normally, okay, well, you can kind of see, they've kind of changed it a bit, but they shrink their font a little bit, they get rid of this. When I checked this the other day, it basically, the beautiful part about it was, it would shrink it, and then it would hide the graphic and turn it into just the text and tell you the rain, and then it would be a smaller graphic and things like that. So there's interesting ways you can do breakdowns, and you don't have to just, okay, this box becomes smaller, because one of my biggest pet peeves is everything being in a box. It's nice to break borders once in a while, and again, this is, I'd say it's a good example, and then it's a bad example. But it's nice to break borders with certain different shapes and things like that, so that's something to always kind of keep a lookout for when you have opportunities as far as design. Breaking like overlapping layers, for instance. One of the ideas I really like that was recently proposed in things is this whole, like, when you have a profile picture on top of images and stuff, you can have things overlap, or like have different pieces of it overlap on top of it to kind of identify who made the content, kind of guide the user's eye through different flow processes, and it kind of relates it without having to use text, without having to use words. And then that falls back better, and that kind of collapses easier. So when you have a square with overlaid items, and like Instagram is kind of a good example of this. When you go to their web version, it collapses. You can see they overlay things kind of nicely. We can actually take a look at that. Oh. So you can see they kind of collapse it back into, they don't really do the overlapping as much anymore because they've kind of updated it, but a couple months ago they had like a really beautiful like breakdown sort of thing. And like the this profile icon here, it's kind of nice when you have things overlapping, because then you wouldn't have to have so much of this tag text and stuff. You could have it integrated, and it's a little cleaner, feels more unique. Just little things like that. And then what else we got? CSS Tricks has a great guide for using SVG. It's pretty much the best one that I've found out there. It goes through everything from making it to the process of like implementing it, the various formats more in depth than I've kind of covered. You can actually see, like, they give you an example SVG code that you can kind of place and play with your code. So that's kind of helpful too. And then there's good books too. Well, one of my favorite books is by Luke Robowski, I believe is how you pronounce his name. And he's one of the people who's really big into kind of gathering the statistics to kind of enforce this idea of mobile first. And yeah, it's good practice to just kind of like start on there, and it really helps solidify your design process. So I highly suggest it, and that's about all I got for you. So if you have any questions, feel free.
You were just showing Instagram how you would shrink it down, and you had some overlays that were there.
Yeah.
In your SASS, would you say you're working on the mobile site? Those overlays, would you put those like kind of those styles of media queries in the same place as you would for mobile and for desktop? Like do you take these media queries and these designs that are specific to mobile and just kind of bunch them together in that element, or do you just have like a certain?
Are you saying as far as like when it compiles, where would it put it?
No, as far as like to organize the design elements of it. So like say if it doesn't look like this on desktop, right? So say it looks a little bit different on desktop, but your desktop styles and your mobile styles, including in the media queries, do you group those all together in your code, or do you just like, or do you have more like, here's your desktop styles and then here's below media queries? Like SASS gives you the opportunity to kind of group this stuff together, right?
And that's why in this example, for instance, I really like the idea that we have for this guy down at the bottom, because then you know they're all in one place and you know where this item is going the whole way through. So I like to kind of cluster them together. I understand like there's kind of two schools of thought with that, and a lot of people like to have all of their queries in one spot, and then the other half like to have their queries with each item. And that's why I kind of like the mix-in style structure, because you have a big piece of code that you don't have to look at. You can just see this is this style, this is this style, this is this style. And then when you're sitting there looking at the pixel numbers, it's kind of confusing. So having the handheld medium and like you name what you're actually doing and it's right there, I feel like it makes it easier, especially when you're onboarding someone new. It helps kind of ease the flow in. They're like, oh, this item does this.
And then you can use Bella.
Yeah, exactly. They kind of correlate together in pretty nice ways. Any other questions? I know I kind of breezed through. Go for it.
So we talk a lot about screen sizes when we talk about responsive, but you also touched on the problem with loading times. I'm sure you can tell by my preposterous dress sense that I'm from the Midwest. And when I call my grandmother or when I send her a link to a website, she tries to load it on her phone. She'll tell me that she has to go home to within range of her Wi-Fi because the network there is so abysmal.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I used to work in mobile, and now I work in broadcast, which is terrible. But when I was working in mobile, one of the things that we would talk about is like coding to the network as well as coding to the device. Like the devices have gotten really powerful, but the network in many places in the United States is still terrible. and I haven't been touching mobile in a while, so have we, are there better ways now to kind of short circuit long loads for those heavy assets? Because like we can load a really big image for those Retina displays, but if it's taking 30 seconds, I want to be able to responsively cut out of my load and display something else.
I'm not sure about cutting out of your load. I mean, you can set, in your scripting, you can set like certain things that will handle, like if the time hangs too long, you've determined this image isn't a viable alternative to return something more basic. That being said, I feel like the best way to go about it is probably to just optimize the images. So maybe you have something small. There are ways to detect speed, but it's almost, I feel like, a hack to kind of like, okay, the speed is this speed, serve up this kind of image. But really optimizing your image structure itself is probably key. And then using sprite maps really heavily is something I know I didn't touch on this, but it's kind of a core tenet to it as well. Because when you have one image, it's like, okay, kind of smaller. And then using SVG in its smallest capacity kind of helps too, because it's just drawing it. So like, it helps render a little easier. It's a little easier on the phone itself. It takes less processing power, I find. So things like that. It's still kind of getting there. Like data is kind of the biggest thing because we have these big powerful devices, but now it's become, the screen resolution demands the highest quality, but then at the same time, the network hasn't quite caught up to what we're doing. So it's like, it's kind of a trade-off and you kind of have to just sort of experiment. A good tool to use for that is Chrome's dev tools where they can do throttling. I tend to use Canary, so I'm not sure if they've put it into this one yet. Let's see what we get here.
It's back to dial-up. You can use progressive JPEGs if you need, I guess.
Yeah, that's true too. But yeah, you can always check like, okay, edge network or something like that, and you can see, okay, well, it seems like it's taking a long time for that one Retina image to come through. Maybe we want to shrink that down or serve something slightly different. Like sometimes it's a design problem too, because when you have a bunch of images or like, oh, we want this 800 kilobyte background image, like do you really need that when it's going to be hidden behind everything, for instance?
To touch on what you just said, there is a method called, or there's a new, Adi Osmani, who's working for Google right now, has released something called Critical CSS on GitHub, and what it does is you basically take what is considered to be above the fold, and you load the styles and all the markup and images and stuff for that. That loads within the viewport, and then everything else comes after that. So there's a new way to kind of enhance and speed up how you're loading a page, and then the rest of it will load as needed. So look on Adi Osmani. He's really good at this kind of stuff. And he would kind of, touch on these plus others. And he's big on SASS and performance as well.
Yeah, I've heard of him before. I hadn't heard of that though. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's really awesome.
There's a new tag that they're creating called, I believe it's called Picture.
Yeah.
And I don't know too much about it, but it's something about that exact problem. Like, you can specify different pictures for different properties of things.
Safari actually has this thing. It's only in Safari, so I kind of don't really use it yet. Because I like to at least have Safari and Chrome support at least, so it's the one rendering engine at least all supports it. And they're making a tag now, like it might even be the same tag. I'd have to look, I don't remember the name of it, but you can put all of the image sizes in line. So like this image 1x, comma, this image 2x, and it serves all of them in one tag. So it's a little cleaner too.
It's called the source set.
Yeah. Source set, okay.
Yeah, and that's one of the W3C's new recommended, is that picture element and source set for images. So you can kind of use one or the other. And Chris Poyer of CSS Tricks has talked about when, amongst a bunch of other people, talked about when to actually use one over the other.
Okay, it's a good one.
The irony is the people that need it aren't going to have the browsers that support it.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the caveat.
Yeah.
It's the caveat to all that.
We might be able to combine that. There's actually just even super recent, probably this week, they announced like the new image format called Better Picture Graphics, BPG. It takes JPG, converted BPG, it's half the size, same quality. And you don't need a new browser because it's decoded client side using JavaScript. So it's, hey, if you need to actually send a payload that's was maybe a meg, now maybe it's only half of it.
Well, if you're brave, you can also do wet pee.
Yeah, right.
That's true.
So yeah, any other questions before we wrap up here?
Your slides are on.
Yeah, we'll put them online if they aren't already. Yeah, I think that's it. I think
Maybe just one more round of applause for both Ben and Brad. Housekeeping things. Starting next year, we'll also be hosting some more meetups. So some of the topics that we're thinking about for 2015 are everything from programming drones to Meteor to we're going to do a whole series on Elixir and functional programming if you guys are interested in that. As well as more about Node. Since we've been using Node for a while now, we want to share some scalability challenges and solutions that we found. So that'll be exciting. What's that?
deep bits.
Deep bits. I'll also mention that Vixlet's, of course, always hiring on every sort of every part of us, if you guys like what we're doing. And that being said, does anyone have any announcements that they want to share within the group, or anything that they're working on, or other meetups that are worth mentioning? No?
Rest in peace.
Cool. Well, Happy New Year, everyone. There's still more food and drinks, and we'll be here for a little while. So thanks again for coming. Yeah,
He's incredibly competent guy.
he is. He's a great guy. So we'll see how we get involved. But he just moved to a different startup.
Oh, so he's not with you guys.
Yeah, he's something different. So yeah, but hopefully it's going to come back and
I didn't know he was for a while.
I like Less too. It's just the first one I learned was SASS. And